Hey Dave, how you doing today?
I'm great, Nick. How are you?
Doing well. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Here it is. Now we've got to make sure this podcast gets posted in a timely fashion, and
All
it's
right.
it's dated,
Happy Halloween 2020 something.
whatever. Yeah, X 2020 X. Be good every fall.
Anywho, it's a beautiful Halloween day out there. Gloomy skies, a little bit of
Hmm.
rain, no snow, so that's good. At least not down
Yeah,
here, but
yeah. No, it's
I
rocking 50
digress.
degrees. So
Love it.
yeah,
We got a great topic today. We are actually talking about retirement spending, and there is a book by Mr. Bill Perkins titled Die with Zero.
yeah.
So today's question, I guess, is should you die with zero? Should you spend all your money before you die?
Yeah, yeah. This I don't have a good feel for like how this book's popularity like outside of our circles is, but
Hmm.
we just came from a conference and I felt like I was halfway done with it when I went to the conference and read the rest of it on the plane on the way home. But everybody was like, "Oh, you haven't read that yet?"
Yeah.
So in the advisor community, at least,
Hmm.
it's been making the
Hmm.
rounds here for a while, and it's all the buzz. And I kept thinking the whole time. I remember Michael Bloomberg about 14, 15 years ago on CNBC stating, if he's a big believer in your financial plan being done right if it ends with a check to the undertaker bouncing, which I Googled that this afternoon, and it turns out most of what you're going to get if you look for Undertaker quotes are going to have to do with the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. But, I, which I just didn't anticipate that. But yeah,
Right.
so
Well,
die with
looks like
zero.
Mr. Bloomberg's got a ways to go because according to Google, his
Right.
net worth is 104 billion right now. So if
Yeah,
he's looking for a
yeah,
place to park
yeah.
some of that, I'm open.
That's good. It's going to be one heck of a funeral,
Yeah.
wake party. Yeah, good. So
So
back
I
to Mr.
love the
Perkins.
premise. Yeah, I love the
Yeah,
premise of this book, which is essentially, we focus all too much on saving for retirement
yeah,
and saving that money when you're young, and then, not necessarily being in a position in retirement to enjoy it, and just thinking through the
right.
dynamics of, and part of this I blame on our industry because ever
Hmm.
since I started in this industry, it was all about, you have to have this big amount of savings for retirement, right? It's got
Right.
to be humongous, and all the focus and energy of all of the ads and all the financial planners is save more money, invest more money, save more
Hmm.
money, invest more money,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just this mindset shift of like, now that we're so worried and concerned about that, especially, when I came up in the industry in 2007, and when we switched over to the 401k and having to worry about
Hmm.
that, right? Like, we don't have a pension that's just going to give us an income. Now we got to worry about how much we're saving and how we're spending that when we
Right.
spend it. It really, it's kind of a mindset flip of, now all these people are retiring and they're, thinking back and having a hard time basically turning that big pile of money into, enjoyment, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why in our community this book gets a lot of traction because
Hmm.
all of us as advisors, and I know it's a like a self-selecting group of people we work with, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, you hear the retirement horror stories out there, and we know they exist, but those aren't the people that hire financial planners usually, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and so, by and large, most of our clients, and I mean the registered investment advisory community at large, not just you and me, but most of our clients have this Bill Perkins problem of
Hmm.
how do we spend our money, not how are we going to make our money last? I mean, we have a
Right.
few, right? But
Yep.
that's not the majority of who we work with. And um, so I think that's why this really strikes a chord with those of us in the industry because we're like, yeah, how do we help these people enjoy their money more?
Yeah.
As
Well,
silly as that may sound to some people.
Well, it's I'm a ways off from retirement, right? But it's something like when I'm reading this book, I'm going, I know that I'm going to have this problem, right? Like
Yeah.
inherently, what makes you a good saver
Yeah.
and good at planning for retirement makes you a crappy retiree, right?
Right. Right. And jumping ahead a little bit to like my thoughts on this book, that was actually my criticism of the book is this is all fine and well, but having worked in this capacity for 20 some years, you don't just tell somebody, hey, you can spend like three times as much as you're used to spending, and they're not going to go there. Very few people are going to go do that
Yeah, right.
just because they can't. Just, I mean, you can hit them with all the logic and all the charts and all the like, hey, this is where you're heading. It doesn't change people's mindset. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's well, it does. We can help guide people better on the
Hmm.
margins, at least with this. We're not necessarily going to change people from. Um, you're not going to go from needing comfort, finding comfort in your portfolio balance, making you feel safe and secure in a way, to all of a sudden being, hey, I'm going to try to hit zero before I die. That just
Right.
isn't going to happen.
Well, and we talk about this a lot on this show, and that is you don't write a book of die with 100,000.
Right,
Right, like that
right,
doesn't get
right.
printed.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, you
Die
got
with
to be
zero,
either
get the
all
pension.
in
Yeah,
or one
yeah,
extreme or the other. You
yeah,
don't get to be wishy-washy, right?
yeah,
And so
yeah,
that's why the title is Die with Zero and the premise is
yeah,
there, but you have to kind of have a fine line if you want something to
yeah,
get not well printed and also read and picked up by people, right?
yeah, and
There's this interesting dynamic in the book where he talks a lot about experiences
yes.
and making memories with your money. And I think there's some really good, valid points that people can
I,
take away from that.
that was my main takeaway. Again, as a professional that has to talk with people about this stuff, is his concept of your life really is the sum total of your memories,
Hmm.
and having those memories and those great memorable experiences early in life means they pay you more, like they're worth more. He equates it to an investment that's going to
Right,
pay you dividends for a longer period of time. If you go on that epic trip to Europe when you're 25 instead of 65, you've got that many more years to savor that memory,
right, yeah.
which is interesting, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I thought that was a pretty cool way to put it. Um,
Yeah, and there was also a lot of talk about, like as a 25-year-old, you can probably do that trip a lot differently. Like if
right.
you were to go back at
Yeah.
65,
Yeah. Yeah. When I was
which I
19, I
thought was
slept on a train station in Nice on the ground. I don't think I'd be doing that now.
you might do it, but you might not get up the same way,
Yeah,
right?
right, right. I would need to have a chiropractor and a physical therapist with me the next day. But yeah, so but that's all really valid and good. But I still like, so most people are going to think this sounds really reckless, though, right?
Yeah, for sure.
and and obvious objections come to mind. So
Hmm.
when we talk to people, what's their biggest fear when they're coming in our door, whether it should be or not, is, am I going to outlive my money, and how
Right.
much can I safely spend?
Yeah. Do I have
And
enough? Right. It's like the
yeah,
first question we
yeah,
always ask or answer.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so the book does look at these objections, and again, back to your point about the tame titles don't sell books. I mean,
Yeah.
his approach really is much more balanced than
Right. Yeah,
you
for sure.
might take from his title. And so he looks at what people are going to object. Obviously, you need money to pay your bills that you're not going to
Hmm.
outlive, and that you do need to be prudent about how much you spend and make sure you save for that. He does point out that there are tools and insurance products you can buy that will help with lifetime income, or with long-term care expenses is another big
Hmm.
concern. And his point is, if that's what you're really worried about, buy insurance, do or set aside enough on the front end, and then take the rest of your money and go have fun. And
Yeah.
That's not bad at all, really.
Yeah, I really liked that. I like it in the standpoint of like know who you are, right? Like if you
Yeah.
struggle with this, if like that's something that keeps you
Yeah.
up at night, even though maybe financially the insurance product isn't the best idea in
Right.
terms of like you could self-insure versus, getting insurance, but if it's going to help you to feel better about being able to spend money and where you're at, then it's probably worth every penny, right?
Yep. Yep. That's it. And so, and along those lines of know yourself, two of the other big objections. What about the kids? Right. I think he
Yeah.
titles the
Oh
one
yeah.
chapter, "What about the kids?" With a big
Yeah.
question mark. And his point, I think he goes a little over the top with it, but we've tried to get this home with clients quite a bit. Is gosh, if you want your kids to have money, give it to them while you're alive and they're young
Mhm.
and need it.
Yeah.
And you then again, if that's important to you, back to the like memories and dividends thing, if that's important to you, do it while you're alive, guide them through the process and enjoy it
Yep.
with them, and you've got that together.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. He's right.
Yeah,
And
and he made a ton of sense to me, right? It's twofold. One, like, yes, they need, you think about like, well, we want to have money
yeah,
left over at the end. Well, by the time that happens, your kids are probably well and established and don't
yeah,
need it, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, giving it to them when they do need it is much more beneficial to them, number one. And number two, just the simple act of giving it to them while you're alive, you're going to get so much more
Is
enjoyment out of that
right,
than if you
right.
waited until you were dead, right?
Right, right. And if you don't feel that way, then you probably should rethink whether you really want to give your kids your money.
Yeah, right?
Right. So back to knowing yourself. Are you just giving money to your kids because you feel like there's some societal obligation there, or is it really what gets you happiness?
Yeah. Well, the same could be
And
said, if you didn't have kids, let's say you wanted to give it all to charity, like maybe
right.
give some of that, have a
Well,
bigger gifting plan now as opposed to, at the end, right?
yeah. Yeah, and that was the next objection was what about charities? I think he weaves it into the chapter about kids. But the same thing, those charities that you want to support, they need that money now. They don't necessarily they're probably going to need it in 20 years, 30 years
Yeah.
too, but they if you give them the choice, they're going to take it now. And then the other thing, that came to mind with that was we don't do a lot with donor advised funds, but that's
Mm.
another possibility
Hmm.
too, where then you've got that gift that you can then have a part in over time,
Yeah.
and there's some pretty cool stuff you can do there.
Absolutely. That, not only benefits the charity and gets you in that gift giving mode, but also helps from a tax perspective so you can do
Right.
more, right?
Um, then another objection that people raise to this, and this didn't surprise me, is I love my job. Why would I quit doing something I love just because I have enough money that I don't need to do it anymore?
Right.
And so his response is, great if your job brings you joy, great, but don't just hoard the money. Give it away.
Right.
Give it to your kids. Spend it. Party. Give it away to
Yeah.
charity. But don't just work for the sake of accumulating more money.
Yeah. I attribute this back to the Soul of Money book that we did a book review on probably over a year ago or so. But
Yeah.
like the whole point of like money is like water. It serves best when it's flowing, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
not like stopped up and hold up. And I think that is very applicable to this. Like yeah, if you want to work, great, but like that doesn't mean you need to continue to save and have all that money. Like it allows you to do
Hmm.
more things, right, not less.
Right.
Which I think is pretty cool. And a lot of like if we have some very similar takeaways to this, and it kind of for me kind of goes back to just thinking through like as an industry, and this is part of the problem with our industry is if how we're incented, how a lot of, not
Hmm.
necessarily us, but a lot of financial plans are incented, right? Like the more money you have, the more the fees, because if we're on a percentage, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
a lot of the retirement advice then is spending much less than what you probably could, because that just means you're going
Yeah.
to have more money to manage in the future, right? That's a
Yeah.
pretty big conflict compared to thinking
Yeah,
about it in
that's
terms of how do I implement or use a lot of this money as opposed to kind of storing it
yeah,
up.
yeah, that's a valid point, and my only answer to that is anecdotal, and that is, I mean, I think you probably saw it too, is how excited people in our industry were about a book
Yeah.
telling people to give their money away.
Well,
So
the people we hang out with, at
yeah, I mean, it's
least.
a little different crowd, but you know, some point some point we'll take over. But that's that is a good point, and the industry is built around that whole concept of savings and know your number, and whatever
Hmm.
you do, don't overspend, and is the 4% rule of thumb too high? Do we need to lower it to 3.5 or 3? And
Right.
you know, um, yeah, yeah, it's a
Maximize
problem.
your investments
Well,
and all that stuff, right? Like
yeah,
it's all kind of built into there.
yeah,
One thing that I want to touch on that I somewhat disagree with as it relates to this book is just the kind of the notion of a lot of the stuff in here, such as like making memories, giving money away. That's what really gave
hmm
Bill a lot of his happiness. And it's true for
hmm
a lot of people, but it's not true for everyone.
yeah, yeah. Well,
And so, like, what I think about that is, figuring out, and part of why our process is the way it is you got to figure out what's going to make you happy, right? And like,
hmm
and that, the example that I get, and this is an extreme one, obviously, is Warren Buffett, right? Like, obviously, that guy doesn't need all that money, and
hmm
he is full intents and purposes of giving the majority of it away, but he's not going to do it until he dies, and the reason
right.
is like that's his thing that he enjoys doing most is building
Running
that up and
Berkshire
running that
Hathaway is
company,
his thing.
right?
Yeah, yeah. He'll still be he will probably pass away with his legal pad in one hand and his pen in the other, working out some deal and figuring out the valuation on some company because he
Yeah,
loves it.
right,
And yeah, I don't. Obviously don't know the guy, but I feel like we all know enough about him to know that he doesn't care about how much he makes. He does in a way, but it's not about the money for him. So that's
right,
that's
yeah,
absolutely right. And kind of the flip side of that, I had jotted down was there's some people that are just would be absolutely miserable not having adequate reserves in the bank throughout their life. I mean, they're just
right,
not ever going to be comfortable with that concept.
mm-hmm,
And is it rational? Is it right? Well, no. As a financial
right,
planner, no. The odds of most of those folks outliving their money is very small, not zero, but small. And but I guess maybe part of this is again time in the business and still remembering folks that had grown up during the Great Depression and like their money memories from their childhood meant that it could be gone in a second if they weren't careful.
yeah,
Um, and Bill, the author's comment in the book. Wait, so and I think this part of what I think most people would find hard to take is the fact that this guy's a millionaire energy trader, right? He's
yeah.
not like working on an assembly line somewhere. But he talks about in the book when he made the first $1 million he made, and he told his mother. Do you remember what her reaction was?
No, I don't.
Don't tell your grandmother; she'll be so worried about you losing it. And so because that was what she grew up with, and that was
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
that was her experience, was if you had money then you had to worry about losing it. So there's all kinds of psychology involved. I mean, you're right, we do have to be careful about assuming that what makes one person happy works for another, or that these concepts aren't going to drive someone else completely bonkers if they try to follow it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We both have clients who have a hard time and would not get enjoyment out of spending money, right? Like they live a pretty simple life and they're very happy with it. And the
Yeah.
fact that they have all this money in reserve allows them to do that, right? And so telling them to spend it is probably a pretty terrible advice, right?
um, I remember early in my career, one of the wealthier clients that we had, every time he came in the bank, he tried to walk out with something, one of their like free things. Like, like he would sweet talk one of the folks into
Yeah.
giving him an umbrella or a piggy bank, or he would not leave the bank without something. And it wasn't about the money, it wasn't about
Yeah.
need, you know. So it's just part of the whole money story for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like the biggest takeaway for listeners is these are the things that you should be thinking about. These are the
Hmm.
conversations you should be
Yeah.
having.
Yeah.
Just because it's written in a book doesn't necessarily mean it works for you. But
No.
if, maybe this helps you feel a little bit better about spending a little bit more, or maybe it makes you feel like, hey, that's not me. And that makes me feel much better about where I'm at, right? I don't have to worry about like, I
Right.
don't have to be Bill Perkins
Well,
if it doesn't bring me
yeah,
happiness, right?
but make it a conscious choice. Don't make
Yes,
it the default to
for
just
sure.
like live very frugally when you don't have to, or
Yeah.
the way I like to see it done. And again, I shouldn't impose my values on it, but I've got some folks I know that I think really have it right are the ones that day to day live very frugally, but then spend their
Hmm.
money on the things that really matter to them, whether that's an
Yeah.
item or an experience, or they're not
Sure.
eating out for fancy dinner every night, but when they go and have a good time, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, we talk about that a lot, right? Like, show me your checkbook and I'll show you what's the most important to you,
yep.
right?
I said that twice this morning on calls. Yep. Show me your budget, I'll
And
show you your
so,
priorities.
yeah, exactly. And so,
Yep.
like, yes, absolutely. If it makes you feel good and it makes sense, like, spend money on those things. But also, the counterbalance to that is don't spend money on those things that aren't, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So, this has been a fun conversation. I would love to
Yeah.
hear stories from our listeners at info@srbadvisors.com. And if you're interested in exploring your retirement or how spending money in retirement would work for you, we'd love to have that conversation. Visit us at www.srbadvisors.com. As always, it's been a pleasure, Dave.
Thanks, Nick.
This is a Zedia Media production.